Hi, I'm Chuck, and today we're going to make a simple crosscut sled. So the materials we're using today are a 2x4 piece of 3/4 inch birch plywood that I have ripped down to 16 inches, cutting two 4-inch pieces and laminating them together. And I've already done that. That's going to be the back brace. And the front, I'm going to use a piece of scrap plywood as well. And for the rails that go underneath of the sled, going into the miter slots, I have a piece that I've ripped down of oak hardwood. So when you make the miter rails, you want to make sure that they're specific to your slots in your miter saw, and you also, if you have an outfeed table, you'll want to make sure there are grooves that they can slide into in the outfeed table. You're going to want to have them a little bit lower so that when you glue them together, you'll raise them up. I'm using pennies for this. You can use washers or whatever, but when you raise them up, they'll be flush at the point to where the base of your sled is at, and then they will glue directly to the bottom of the sled. So I'm going to cut this in half. Once we get the rails glued onto the bottom of the sled, we are going to reinforce them with some screws. I'm going to go ahead and countersink some holes in so that we don't have to worry about doing that when the glue is setting up. So these are fitting really well into the slots. What I'm going to do is to, like I said before, I'm going to put some pennies underneath them so that it raises them up to the point of where they need to attach to the bottom of the sled. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of glue on here, try not to get it into the holes. I don't want it to go down through into the miter slots. And this is going to hold it in place until we get it screwed onto the bottom of the sled. And the screw and glue together should keep it attached to the sled pretty well. Again, lining these up with the back. I'm going to take my sled and line it up with the fence. And I want mine, and this is just a personal preference, I want mine even with the edge of this side of the table saw. I have the end of the miter sled even with the fence, and as I drop it down onto the glued rails, it will set up onto the bottom of the sled. Alright, so I went ahead off camera and screwed into the holes on the bottom that we had made earlier on the rails and countersunk them in. One problem I did run into is that on one or two of the holes, I didn't use the countersink bit to the depth that I needed to, and it started to crack the board. So I went ahead and pulled that out, did additional holes on the either side of it, and just left the hole empty. That should be fine. They're held together pretty sturdy, and importantly, they fit really well into the slots with hardly any kind of side-to-side motion. One thing you can do also that I'll do later on when I'm finished is add wax to the bottom of this and to the rails, and it will even go more smoothly across your table saw. Alright, so I am going to use a front brace on the crosscut sled. Not everybody does. It does not affect the alignment of the sled, but I think it adds a little bit more structural integrity to the sled. If you didn't have it and you had the cut going through here, you wouldn't have anything to balance how these pieces are flexing. So I have drawn onto the bottom of the board where I'm going to countersink the screws at, so I'll go ahead and do that. So I'm going to clamp the front board onto this upside down, and I have my countersunk screws in there, so we will go ahead and add the screws to that. Alright, so now that the front is on the sled, I am going to begin to add the back panel of the sled. This one does need to be square, so there's a very specific way we're going to do that. We are going to countersink and drill in a pivot hole, and we're going to do that on this side over here. So now I'm going to countersink a hole to add a pivot screw onto the bottom of the back piece of the sled. Now that that hole is countersunk, we are going to put a screw into there. The reason we countersink these is to ensure that the screw is below flush so that it's not riding against the table and just the bottom of the table saw sled is going onto your table. All right, so we got that pivot hole on. Let's go ahead and try to square up the back of the sled. All right, so to level the back of the sled, what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the table saw. The table saw blade is below flush. We will then raise it up through so that we have a point to level this against. I'm going to use some masking tape, which can reduce the tear out when you are cutting through something. There shouldn't be any anyway. I have a fairly new blade in there. All right, so now that we have the blade raised up through the sled, we are going to align it with the back panel of the sled. Everybody has a trusty old square. I have a rusty old square, but it works like a champ, and we are going to use that to level one side up against the saw blade and the other flush to the back of the sled. Aligning my square with the blade and aligning the other end of the square with the back fence of the sled. Again, very important when you put the countersink screws in to not accidentally screw where the blade is going to be running across the sled. All right, I got the second screw in on the other end of the sled, and that appears to be pretty dead on. So to check square, I'm going to use the 5-cut method. Basically, you take a piece and you cut it, rotate it 5 times, and the squareness that it would be off after the 5th cut is 5 times the inaccuracy of your square of your cross-cut sled. Checking the square of our board that we did the 5-cut method on, it looks pretty darn square. It's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So then we will go ahead and reinforce the back part of the sled with some more screws. All right, so here it is. Here's our cross-cut sled. I know what some people are saying, you have a miter saw, why would you need a cross-cut sled? You can do a little bit more with a cross-cut sled than at least my miter saw. I do have a miter saw, I use the miter saw a lot, but this just gives me a little bit, another option in the shop, and it wasn't very difficult to make, wasn't very expensive to make. Comes to about $30, and it took maybe, aside from the glue setting up, maybe an hour to make. So it's pretty simple, nice little project, and that's all for this one. Thanks.